So in this lecture, we're going to look at some of the many ways that bias can creep into research results. And hopefully, by the end of this section, you'll have an idea of the complexity involved in trying to design a statistical research project. So sampling bias is a broad category of bias that refers to situations where some segment of the population is underrepresented in the final sample. And there's a classic example here from the 1948 U.S. presidential election, where the Chicago Tribune printed an enormous headline declaring incorrectly that Dewey had beaten Harry Truman. And there's a famous picture of Truman holding up the paper with just this enormous grin on his face. Now, at the time, this kind of sampling or polling was still very new, and the pollsters had relied on the results of phone surveys. Now, that might not seem like an unusual choice today. Most of us have gotten those kinds of phone surveys, but in the 1940s, telephones were still very new and mostly owned by the wealthy. So relying on them for results caused less wealthy families to be underrepresented. So I'm recording this in the late summer of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic is still racing around the world, and the accuracy of testing results is a major topic of discussion. One thing that stands out in the results is that different countries are showing significantly different fatality rates. And one explanation for this is the level of testing. Countries that are testing less are showing higher fatality rates because their reduced testing is only catching the worst cases. That is, the mild to moderate cases in the population are less likely to be represented in the results. Self-selection is a specific example of sampling bias that we've actually talked about before in the context of sampling methods. The key problem with methods where individual groups have control over their participation is that people who feel strongly are more likely to volunteer to participate, which can bias the results towards more extreme opinions, leaving the more moderate silent majority, if you will, underrepresented. Survivorship bias is another type of sampling bias where only the surviving members of a population are considered. So the scenario here, for example, may seem reasonable, but it doesn't include the perspective of businesses that went bankrupt or otherwise closed over the last year. Right? And that's an important segment of the population that won't be represented in the results, causing them to be skewed toward businesses that were able to navigate any unusual challenges that may have occurred during the year. Again, the COVID-19 period when I'm recording this is a great example. There are a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, that are closing or they're going bankrupt. And any kind of survey of the business environment to kind of see how companies are handling this, very, very sudden, very drastic change in the business world, most likely won't include representation from that segment of the business population. So now we've looked at several examples here, but this is really just a sample of the multiple issues that can come up and that fall into this category. So in the next lecture, we're going to give a similar treatment to another category of biases called reporting bias.